Stardate 2905.3. So this one's going to be a little bit different. This is the story of what happened when I got dehydrated and had a migraine on trail. So it's going to be like a recounting of hospital stuff. So basically, I woke up with a nasty headache around 4 a.m. In the section between Silver City and Thorndon. It was the first night. It didn't seem like a migraine at first, so I didn't take it and leave right away. That's the thing that usually knocks them out for me. So I tried to go back to sleep, woke up. At that point, it was clearly a migraine, and so I took a leave, but it was too late. When I don't take them in time, they sort of become full-blown migraines. So went back to sleep, woke up again, took another 2 in the morning, just like to throw more medicine at it just in case. But basically, I was like, let's, just see how it goes. And I packed up. I started having vision issues about maybe like a mile into the hike. And it was pretty intense terrain. Headache was pretty bad, so I was like getting grumpy. So I called home and complained. And it got to the point where I was clearly not going to be able to hike any further. So I found some shade on a flat part of a trail on a ridge with a nice little view, and got out my Tyvek, got under my sleeping bag, and I went to sleep. Maybe an hour or two later, I heard some footsteps. It was almost like a dream, and I looked up and I saw another hiker. I couldn't speak at that point. My migraines, one of the symptoms is after a while I can't, say words. I sort of know what I want to say, but I can't find almost any words at all. It's called expressive aphasia. I can still understand other people, but I can't communicate. So I tried to motion to the hiker like I was okay, and, he should keep going, and got back under my sleeping bag to go to sleep. And when I woke up, he was still there, and he had an InReach in his hand. That's like a little satellite device a lot of us carry. I assumed it was his, and I also assumed he triggered an SOS. And so I was like, didn't think that was necessary, but there wasn't much I could do to stop it at that point. I was kind of drifting in and out of sleep, feeling pretty bad. One way to sort of avoid the headache and the worst part of it is just to sleep as much as possible. So woke up again, and he was still there. Maybe like an hour had passed, and he was talking to someone on the phone. Went to sleep, woke up again, and noticed that he'd put like a water bottle really close to my, my head where I could get to it. I guess he thought, I was really, really out of it. So I took a little bit of water and started vomiting. Felt better, went back to sleep. And then what seemed like a lot of time passing, I'd kind of like wake up and see him, and he was just like sitting there smoking these clove cigarettes. He was sort of like a young guy. All his gear was new, but he looked, like he knew what he was doing. He looked like a proper hiker. So eventually, probably after 4 hours, the sheriff's deputy showed up, and I was like, all right, they're going to take me out here. So I got up, got to my feet, and started packing my bag. My hands weren't working well enough to stuff my sleeping bag back into my pack, but between the sheriff's deputy and, me, we kind of messily got my backpack packed up again. I tried to put it on my back, but he stopped me, and he was like, whoa. He put it on, made the shoulder straps a little longer, and had me sort of march out in front of me. I thought we were going to go north, sort of back to Silver City where I'd come from, but he turned me around and pointed me south, which I thought was weird, but I couldn't, ask any questions because I couldn't speak still. I made it about 200 feet before I started feeling just like not good, and I needed to sit down. My legs were kind of collapsing. And after a couple minute rest, I tried to get back to my feet, but I couldn't. I couldn't use my arms or legs in a coordinated way. And I wasn't sure if it was dehydration or if it was a symptom of my migraine. I had never in one of these like really bad migraines actually tried to do anything as active as walk at all. So this was kind of new territory for me. I didn't know what I was going to be able to do in the middle of a full-blown migraine. I sort of almost wished that I'd been, able to just stay on the trail and sleep. So yeah, it could have been dehydration or the migraine. And we stayed put, couldn't move. Eventually, two other young women, EMTs, showed up with all kinds of gear. They had uniforms and all kinds of stuff, including an IV. One of them cut open my hoodie, like the arm on my hoodie with scissors. And that was pretty upsetting. I was like, no, because it was a custom made hoodie that my friend Four Eyes had made for me. And it was like perfect. I loved it. So that was sad. But once the IV was in, I did start to feel better after a few minutes and wanted to get up and, get going because I thought we might have a ways to go. But they sort of, stopped me and, said we're going to rest a while. That kind of made me a little grumpy because I thought we should be moving. So I was like, let's go. But they continued to restrain me until I kind of burned out and fell asleep. When I woke up, I felt clear and refreshed. So that was good instinct on their part, I guess, to give it more time. And I got to my feet and we started to hike out with the sheriff's deputy sort of underneath one of my shoulders, sort of supporting my weight. And as we went, they asked me questions like what my first name was. And I was able to say Raphael, and what my last name was. And I would say Raphael. I thought I was answering the questions, but I was just saying my name over and over. And apparently I thought it was 2026. I knew Trump was the president. So I was able to answer a few of the, maybe half the questions that they asked. And when I said something nonsensical, they acted like we should stop, but I was always motioning them, we should keep going because I really thought we should get out of there while I was, able to make forward progress. So after 100 feet or so of the deputy helping me, I was actually able to hike on my own, and we made it to a dirt forest service road. I did have to stop a couple times along the way, and every time I stopped, I drank a little bit and sort of immediately threw up. I think it was about a mile and a half to the forest road from where I'd lay down. I'm just checking to make sure this is recording still. So once we got to the forest road, we stopped. I tried to drink more water out of my bottles, but that time the EMTs stopped me, and they were like, no, and they gave me a different bottle with water. They clearly thought there was something wrong with the water at that point, and there might have been. Shortly after, a Jeep showed up, and the four of us took the Jeep a mile or two to a larger dirt service road, and I was transferred to an ambulance. It was like a road that was large enough for an ambulance. And there was definitely something wrong with my legs. They were like super stiff and felt cramped, and I felt weak. And yeah, that I think my guess would be was something to do with the dehydration. And every time I'd asked for water, the EMTs didn't want to give me any. Later, someone told me that's because they don't want anything to go in your stomach, and the IV was supposed to be hydrating me, but it really felt wrong. Finally, one of the nurses let me have a little bit of water because I was refusing to get into the ambulance until I got some water. I was like, listen, I need some water. I'm so thirsty. And so I lay down in the back of the ambulance, and it was a long ride on a lot of dirt roads. I thought I was being taken really far away. And, I was kind of starting to sleep a little bit. So I was having these almost like daydreams, like I was being abducted. And partly it was because they were taking me further and further from the trail, which is really where I wanted to be. I was so close to finishing the CDT at that point. I only had, that last section and then another 80 miles. So I was just like, where are you taking me? I need to get back there. I need to finish the trail. And it was such a long ride, and like bouncing around, it actually became hard to breathe. And the EMT in the back noticed that I was sort of like heaving, so she gave me oxygen, and it was much easier to breathe once I had the oxygen. We finally got to the hospital, and once we got there, I wasn't on my feet anymore. They slid me out of the back on some kind of ramp and lifted me onto a gurney, and I just sort of watched the ceiling of the hospital go by as they wheeled me around into like an emergency room. At that point, they seemed like they were about to cut the rest of my hoodie, like up the front of it. Let me see here. I lost my place. Yeah, so I actually was able to stop them at that point. I was like, no. And I was able to sit up and make the effort to get it off. And that seemed to impress them. Maybe they were happy that I had some energy, and the whole room just sort of seemed to relax a little bit after that. They attached all kinds of sensors to me, probably for EKG, and all kinds of stuff went into my IV. So it was like a whole workup. And a lot of that was because, I couldn't tell them anything. So they had to cover, lots of different possible scenarios. The only thing that I could say the word tomorrow. So I got across my request that please don't do too many things. Just wait until tomorrow. And that seemed to make some impression, but didn't stop them from, doing what they were going to do. So there was like all kinds of imaging, some sort of cylindrical machine that I got slid into, and eventually ended up in an ER room. It was incredibly painful by that point because I hadn't been able to pee, and the IVs had been just filling me up with water all the way since, the trail, and then in the back of the Jeep, which was bouncing around, in the ambulance, and then in the hour or two in the hospital, they were working me up, and I could never communicate that I needed to pee. So finally, I was able to just focus and muster my energy, and I was able to say the word, pee to one of the guys that was close by, and it came out like a growl, like a sort of feral growl. And the guy, was able to get me a bedside urinal and look after me. So after the pain of that pass, it was a huge relief. And a nurse sat down with me for a long time, trying to get me to talk, asking me all kinds of questions. And all I really wanted to tell her was, this isn't going to work. You're not going to get me to talk. I have expressive aphasia. This is a migraine. Wait until tomorrow. Really, all I could say was tomorrow. I couldn't say any of that other stuff. If I had been able to say that other stuff, she wouldn't have been there for, 2 hours trying to get me to talk. So eventually, after I started to hear them talking about what they wanted to do next, they wanted to do a spinal tap next. I was just like, no. Because this had happened to me before when I was much younger, when I was about 19 or 20. I'd been taken in to the hospital and got worked up when I had a migraine, and they thought I had taken some drugs or something because I was, a college kid. And they thought I was unconscious, and so they didn't give me any anesthesia, and they gave me a spinal tap, and it was one of the most painful experiences of my life, and I was not about to have that happen again. They were calling it a lumbar puncture, but it's the same thing. So, I was like, no, and they said he still has he seems to still have decision-making ability. So thank God that they thought that, and they didn't just override my wishes there, because that would have been a rough thing to go through. So I did sort of have a nice time slowly communicating to the guy looking after me, because he had my backpack. So he was like, it looks like you're a hiker. And I could sort of nod. And so we had this kind of interesting, slow, sort of puzzling out how we could communicate with each other. And he, I guess, had some extra time. Yeah, he's a really nice guy, older guy, and he wanted to hike the CDT himself apparently. So once he figured out that's what I was doing, he was like, "Oh," and started asking me lots of questions that I couldn't answer. So in any case, I ended up spending the night on a gurney in the ER, not sleeping too much. And they actually made a plan to transfer me via a helicopter to a hospital in Las Cruces, which is just north of El Paso. So they could do sort of like a neurology workup on me. Thankfully, there was a storm that night, and they didn't do it, and I was spared what I heard was probably a $6,000 bill to be transferred via helicopter. Don't know if my insurance would have covered that, but I did. I was a little confused about my insurance, so I was really worried it was gonna this entire hospital visit was gonna cost me a lot of money. And I'd forgotten that I had insurance. But at some point, I got clear enough in my head to remember that I'd actually signed up for adventure travel insurance with a company called World Nomads, and I recommend them. Like at the last minute on a whim when I was going to bed, I don't know, 2 or 3 weeks before, because it was only like a couple $100. And I realized that would cover the evacuation bill for the ambulance and, for the sheriff's deputy and the EMTs coming out onto the trail and all that stuff. So that was a huge relief. And I did have normal health insurance. So yeah, just super lucky that was all in place. But yeah, so anyway, the next day I was able to communicate much better, and I wanted to leave the hospital. I, still worried about the cost, so I just wanted to get out of there. I thought I was fine the next day. I've had a lot of these migraines in my life, and I kind of knew the drill. But they wanted to keep me another day, another night, because my temperature had been 102.9 at one point, and they were worried that I had an infection. And they also wanted to do a CT scan, and they couldn't do that until Monday. It was Sunday, the second day here. So they moved me to a much nicer inpatient room that had a bathroom and a shower, and I got like meals the food was actually pretty good. It was a really nice little hospital actually in Silver City. And at that point I was communicating with my family, could talk to them. My girlfriend decided to fly all the way out from Boston. It was awesome to see her. And she sort of dragged me back to Boston, no matter what my protesting was, because I still wanted to finish the trail. So I knew I would be back in a couple of weeks, but, I wanted to get out there like, like the next day. So anyways, but over the next couple of days, we made our way to El Paso and caught a flight back. And it did take at least a week to properly recover from all that. I had been properly dehydrated and had something called rhabdo happen to my muscles in my legs. It's sort of like a deterioration of the muscles that releases a toxin that can be really bad for your kidneys. I didn't have it terribly, but just that I had it at all and had been in the middle of that process, I was really an indication that I was properly dehydrated, by the time I got to the hospital at least. So yeah, what would have happened, right, if that hiker hadn't found me? I really think I probably would have been okay. I was close to a water source. I'm pretty sure I ended up so badly dehydrated because of how long the evacuation took. I wasn't actually super dehydrated when I lay down on the trail. I had water with me, although it was bad. Yeah, so it's also the only time I was forced to exert so much energy while in the middle of a full-blown hemiplegic migraine. So in that state, I really should have just been trying to sleep and let it pass with time. But all this is conjecture. I'll never know. It was surprising to me what happened to my legs, how I couldn't stand up. And it also took me off guard how quickly I was getting dehydrated with the vomiting. So the water might have been contaminated that I was drinking. The water source close by might have been a problem. Yeah, so I don't know for sure, but if it was, and I never thought to swap it out for different water, I might not have been able to rehydrate myself. It was the worst migraine I'd had in, at least 20 or so years. So, yeah, I probably would have been in a bad state even a day or two later. So, hearing myself talking about this, I think in the end it was definitely for the best that I was evacuated. It's just hard to swallow the fact that there was so much effort, time, and money by so many people. They went into dealing with what was essentially just a headache for me that wouldn't have been there if I had been able to take the leave maybe an hour or two earlier. So the lesson for me, like the changes I'm making to my hiking going forward, I'm going to get a little laminated card that just has information about my migraine. So an EMT or anyone who finds me understands more clearly what's happening to me and, doesn't overreact, still looks after me, but, doesn't try to give me a spinal tap right away. And I'm also going to start carrying rehydration salts. I think that's, if I was just left on my own, that probably would be a big deal if I was, if I had rehydration salts and was able to rehydrate myself. So anyway, that's the saga of, one non-hiking Stardate saga here. But I did cover a couple miles, so I guess it counts. Yeah, hope all of you are doing well, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.